that snake, what would it have done if it bit me? What do you think about murder? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Did you feel fully qualified to go?
I never felt fully prepared for any of the trips we were going on. They make us poop in holes and butcher chickens and sleep in hammocks.
You find some pastors' kids who also start going into ministry or go the complete opposite way.
Except for the Mormons. They don't like Mormons. What about that thing? Is that thing dangerous? And they're like, yeah.
All these low points and high points. I'm just wondering how your faith fluctuated and how you personally grew in your faith.
I knew that Christ was going before me, beside me and behind me. It's amazing what happens when you're entirely dependent upon God. When we'd walk into communities, you could feel the darkness.
Would you say there was a drastic difference in your faith?
I heard a voice cry out from the desert saying, "Who shall I send?" And I replied, "Here I am, Lord, send me."
Hey guys, welcome back to the next episode of Untuck Your Cross. Thank you so much for being here. And today is a special day because we have our very first guest, Kalis Panagal. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you so much for being my first guest. First question off the bat, you spent 2 years in the jungles. What is the food that you missed the most eating while you're on your time out there?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have food from the jungle that I miss particularly, but food from Colombia that I do miss. The mangoes were amazing, and I miss them a lot.
What about specifically in Calgary? What did you miss when you were on your time over there?
Ooh, from Calgary, home cooked meals.
What specifically?
Like
stands
just
out?
a good stew, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, your family has honestly had a huge impact on my testimony. I've known both your younger brothers for a while, since elementary school. Your dad, Pastor Shane, was the man who actually baptized me, and through the young adults program, honestly had a huge impact on what made me decide I wanted to put my life in Christ. But I haven't heard your testimony specifically, so I'd just love to get a chance to just know you more about in that lens.
Yeah. So I grew up in Calgary. My dad is a pastor here in Alberta. And so, yeah, I grew up in the church, was surrounded by strong, faithful Christians. And yeah, had just many examples of what that looks like in my life. And growing up, I got to go on several different trips, one to Israel and Jordan, and one to Cuba, where I got to serve and see different people, what it looks like to serve overseas. And just growing up, being surrounded in those environments and seeing those things just provided me with lots of opportunities to ask, what would it look like for me to serve Christ? And what does it look like to follow Christ? And so when I was about 9 years old, I gave my life to Christ and was baptized. And then just growing up after that, found different ways to continue following Christ. For me, one of the big ones was at school. I had a great group of friends. We'd been friends since kindergarten all the way through high school and still are friends now. And none of them were Christians. But for me, it was an awesome opportunity to be invitational and share the love of Christ with them. And so my parents, they continually supported me in that and just said, "Hey, Caleb, you're going to be a light in dark places and you need to go and talk to them." And for me, it was junior high, I think, where I really grew in my faith. And I had lots of opportunities to engage with non-believers and just learn what it looks like to be confident in sharing the gospel.
Amen to that. Was there a specific moment when you were in grade 9 that made you finally make that decision to give your life to Christ?
For me, it was when we went to Israel and Jordan. I had family who were serving overseas there at the time, and it was just being able to go and witness just how much people need the love of Jesus in their lives. So we went and visited a Syrian refugee camp, and they had nothing, and it was just really hard to see. But in that, they were able to find hope and love and peace in Christ, and that was beautiful to see.
That's awesome to hear. So as a pastor's kid, there's obviously some views that people have from an outside perspective, whether or not that's you find some pastors' kids who also start going into ministry or go the complete opposite way. And so I'm just wondering what your experience has been with that. How did I know your family is a lot of missionaries, a lot of pastors. So how did that exactly mold your faith?
Yeah, so that is very much true, where sometimes pastors' kids, it's either you're an angel or you're a devil, and there's not really an in-between. For me, my parents really tried to make sure that my faith was my decision. So making sure that I was in public school. So I got 8 hours of secular life, 8 hours of home life, 8 hours of sleep. And that meant that nobody could really say that choosing to follow Christ was either forced upon me or it was just because my parents were Christians. but it was my decision. Um, and so yeah, having that environment where there wasn't any pressure to make a choice. It was always, this is what I want to believe. This is my decision, and it's not because of any parent or any societal thing.
Oh, that's awesome. And so now I want to talk about your whole journey as a missionary.
Hmm.
So what initially prompted you to want to become a missionary and join the IMB, if I'm correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to serve as an International Mission Board or IMB journeyman explorer, which is a 2-year commitment to go and serve overseas. So they're kind of our international branch for sending missionaries. And for me, that process started on that second trip where I got to go to Cuba. So this was a trip that Richmond Hill did, and we sent a team to go serve in Cuba. And it was during that trip that I really felt the call to missions. It was a short-term trip, so only a couple weeks. But yeah, getting to get involved with other churches and pastors and missionaries, and to get a taste of what that life would look like, really set the flame inside me to go on and do missions. And so I graduated high school. Wasn't quite sure what life was going to look like, but my parents encouraged me to go and get a degree that I could use pretty much anywhere. So whether I was here in Canada or serving overseas, just something that would allow me to either find work if I needed to, or that I could apply into a ministry context. So I went and I got a geography degree from the University of Lethbridge, and absolutely loved my time there. And then graduated and was trying to figure out how I was going to be able to use geography in a ministry context. And my aunt came up to me. She's a missionary serving in Peru. And she's like, Caleb, there's this new program. It's to go and send missionaries to unengaged, unreached people groups. And their job is to go and research them primarily. So you go in and you figure out who they are, where they live, what that looks like, what needs they have. And then you come back with the purpose of sending more missionaries afterwards. And she's like, your degree would be perfect for that. So I started looking into it. About a year later, found myself in the middle of the jungle.
And so what was that whole process of actually applying to be a journeyman,
Hmm.
and finally picking where you're actually going to go and do your mission?
So it's a little bit of a lengthy process, and that's for good reasons. When you go with the International Mission Board, you go fully supported. So as opposed to many other missionaries who have to raise funds and support while they're serving, if you go with the IMB, you have everything covered. And you receive a salary, and it's pretty amazing. So as a part of that, they want to make sure that the people that they're sending are committed and are equipped, and they want to make sure that you have a church that's supporting you and a body of Christ that's got your back and that's praying for you. And so you start the application process. They connect you with a mentor, and they kind of put you through a discipleship process. Takes about 8 months. They do interviews with you, so they actually fly you in, and you spend a couple days getting to meet with some of the people, and then they start connecting you with different teams around the world. So we have teams in pretty much every country around the world, and they want to make sure that you're connected to the right team leader and that you're going to mesh well over the course of 2 years. Because if you don't have a good team leader, it's going to be a rough 2 years. So for me, it was a little bit faster than most people, mostly because I had a partner whose name was Colson, and he was a little bit further along in the process and got to the point where he was ready to go through training and didn't have a partner to go with him. And they were like, Caleb would probably be a good partner if we can just accelerate his timeline a little bit. Let's make it happen. So I got a call one day, and they said, hey, if you want to do this, you need to be ready to go in about 2 weeks. And that was in June. And then, yeah, end of June. And then by July, I was flying out. So very quick process.
One of the things I wanted to ask was, you're planning to go on this 2-year mission trip, that
Mhm.
Mindspace. Did you have any hesitations whatsoever? What were the questions you were asking yourself? Any struggles into actually finally making the commitment to go on this 2-year mission trip?
Yeah, so there were some hesitations, some doubts. Mostly if I'm capable of doing this. Is this the right thing I should be doing? Will I be able to function, not having my family and friends close by, things like that. But none of it where I was really worried. None of it really scared me. I knew that Christ was going before me, beside me, and behind me, and that was really my encouragement. And then knowing that for me it was 2 years, so it's not forever. So if it wasn't something that I was going to continue in, I knew I only had to do it for 2 years, and then I could um, transition out of that. But right now, it's looking like that missions is something that I'm going to continue in. Um, so we'll see. But yeah, there were some hesitations. The nice thing about the IMB is they'll find the right job for you. So they'll work together with what you feel called to, and then what's available. For me, the position I found was perfect. I love the outdoors. I love going to cool places and hiking and camping, hunting and fishing. And so the job that I got to do was amazing. But it's definitely not for everybody. So I know people right now who are their main ministry is surfing. They go out and they surf every day, and then they share the gospel with people on the beach. And that's what they felt like they were called to, and so that's what they're doing. So yeah, there's positions and stuff, and the IMB does a really good job of connecting you to the right team.
Did you have a different options to choose between? Because I know your younger brother had a couple different options that he was applying to, and then finally made a commitment. What was that process?
Yeah, so for me, the choosing process was pretty quick, just because they had a guy Colson who was ready to go,
Mhm.
and so I didn't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out which place or which team I was going to go with. Um, because yeah, God really just presented to me the option and said, "All right, here's where I want you to go. You're going to go do it." So for some people, it takes a little bit longer to kind of choose where they want to go, but for me, it was pretty much thrown down at my feet and said, "This is what you're going to do."
And could you talk about exactly where that was and what that whole plan was for where you guys were going?
Yeah, so we went to so my boss, his name is Joe. He is a missionary who grew up on the field, has a lot of experience specifically in what we call indigenous jungle context. So these are people groups who are living in very isolated areas. They have removed themselves from a lot of society purposefully, and are living pretty much in the furthest reaches of the jungle that you can get. And so we were going to these groups, and it usually involves several days of travel, um, lots of preparation, lots of getting approval from governments and different organizations, and yeah, so it's very isolated areas. They're living hunter gatherer lifestyle. They are semi nomadic. They also they'll raise some crops, but for the most part live off of the land. So getting used to that lifestyle took a little bit. For me, the IMB just doesn't send you in cold turkey. They put you through a training process. So it involved 2 months of missionary training school in the States. And then following that, I did language school for 3 months in Bogota. And then a month long indigenous training where they make us poop in holes and butcher chickens and sleep in hammocks. And yeah, it's kind of like boot camp for missionaries.
Will probably needed to be in that type of environment. I obviously want to go into some of the details of that story, but first, why? What is the point of going to missionary, doing mission trips, and being a missionary? I think some people who aren't Christian would think that you might be, trying to get on God's good side or trying to earn your way into heaven. So,
Right.
if you could just clarify that and just what your opinion is on why you're actually doing this.
Yeah. So when we talk about why we go as missionaries, what it really stems from is Matthew 28, what we call the Great Commission, in which we read that Jesus says, "Therefore, all authority," this is Jesus speaking, "has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and know that I will be with you until the end of the age." And so we have this commission from Christ to go and tell people about the gospel or the good news. And then from that, we go to Revelation 7:9, which is this beautiful verse in which um, they talk about this. uh, and a great host from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation, praising and worshiping the Lord. So we what we take away from that is that the gospel isn't for any people group or person or uh, culture specifically, but it's for everybody. And as a result of that, one of our duties as followers of Christ is to tell people about that. And for some people, that looks like just talking to their neighbors and their friends and the people close to them. But then for other people, it's to go to these far off places and to these groups that have um, no access to the gospel unless somebody goes to them. And so our biblical example for that comes from Acts, where we see Paul and Luke and the other apostles going out and going into villages and towns and cities and telling people about Jesus.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people would think that, yeah, you're just doing mission trips. You're trying to add something to your salvation, but
Hmm.
obviously that perfect work on that cross is sufficient. Nothing can add to that.
Yeah.
So now you're on your way to, was it Colombia first that you started off at?
Started off in Colombia.
Yeah, and so you're on your way to Colombia. You land. What is, you open the door. What's the experience right off the bat of being there as a missionary?
Yeah, so my boss, he was amazing. He got us connected to a host family, so some local Colombians who had us live with them, took us in, and helped us get through language school, and they were amazing. So every day after language school, I would walk into the house, and El Señor would be there with his Bible open. He only spoke Spanish, no English whatsoever, and we would sit down and we'd read our Bibles together, and it'd be a good way for me to practice my Spanish and for us to bond. And they were amazing. So we got connected with their church, and their church was super supportive of us and what we were doing. And because in Colombia, so in a similar way to Canada, there's a hesitation for Colombians to go to indigenous groups. And so sometimes it's hard to find people who are willing to go to some of these places. And so the church was super excited to have us come and people who were willing to go and into some of these places that they knew that they themselves weren't going to. So yeah, we lived with them for about 3 months while we were in language school. They took us all around the country, all to all kinds of different places and events and stuff to help us get used to culture and language. And then after that, we went off to our indigenous training school. So
Was there any culture shocks going from Calgary to Colombia that you experienced?
less than you'd think, especially in Bogota. It's a pretty multicultural, multinational city. So you can get food from pretty much anywhere. The biggest one for me was language for sure. Takes a little bit getting used to. The nice thing about Spanish from Bogota is it's pretty slow. It's very clear. So it's a good type of Spanish to learn if you're picking it up. But besides that, there wasn't a whole lot. I know Colson experienced a little bit more than I did. He's from Kentucky and wasn't quite used to the international scene as much as I was. So he had a little bit more of a learning curve, but for me it was pretty simple.
And so on your way to the jungle, what was that process like? Because I'm assuming that you can't drive your car to all these tribes. Yeah. So what was that process like?
Yeah, so during our jungle training school, they kind of walk us through how to go from point A to point B. And where it usually starts is we have a map, and we have our people groups that we know exist, but most of our information is either old, it's outdated, or it wasn't entirely correct in the first place. And so one of our first jobs was to go and do research. And that involved looking at government websites, going to different university websites, and figuring out what kind of papers on linguistics and cultural aspects of these communities have been written. Because there have been studies and different stuff done with these groups, different aid projects have been done in the past as well. So it involves a lot of research from the start. And then what we start looking for is what we call a national partner. Usually it's a local believer who has some knowledge of the area or the groups themselves, but not always. And on our first couple of trips, we had really amazing national partners. And then towards the end, it was groups that we had very little contact for And so we had to kind of go in without a local contact. But for the most part, yeah, we had these national partners who were going in with us, and they were kind of our guides. They were helping us navigate culture and language, especially if the indigenous groups only spoke their indigenous languages. So we needed to have a translator who was coming in with us. So we're going from indigenous language to Spanish to English. But yeah, so it starts off with that research, and then we get our national partner, and then we start developing our plan for a trip. Um, every trip changed. We never had a plan that actually followed through. There's always something that came up. And so, yeah, we'd go out, and usually it involved first a flight. We'd get onto a regional flight, and it would take us to what we call a port city. And this is usually a town or a city that has goods and services going in and out of the jungle. Um, so we'd fly into there, and then we'd get connected with our national partner, and then from there we would head out. And we took every single kind of transportation that you can think of, whether that was tiny jungle planes landing on clear-cut landing strips in the middle of the jungle, to canoes, to long barges in which we're sleeping for multiple days with 200 other people in hammocks, and there's chickens running underneath us. And yeah, every kind of form of transportation that you can think of, we probably took it. The only one that we didn't get to do that I really wanted to was the water landings with
Oh yeah.
the prop planes on the water. That we never got to do, but
Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, obviously, there's like a lot of animals and creatures in that jungle. And I think I remember the email newsletter that you were sending out, and I think your dad mentioning that there was a snake that fell in your canoe. I was wondering if you could tell us that story.
yeah, so that was one of our more adventurous trips that we went on. Um, so the area that we were in is a gold mining town, way far out in the middle of the jungle along the Brazilian border. A little bit of a sketchy area, so we were having to take extra precautions in that area. There was quite a few bad actors that were moving in and out, so it was a trip that we didn't know we were going to be able to go on. We'd heard some news that some of the guerrilla groups, the armed groups, were moving in and out, and we we got the news that it was safe. We had a window, so we went in. And with the snake on my foot, what had happened is we got connected with this local believer, and we'd been spending a couple weeks with him. And at one point, we were running out of food, and he's like, "All right, we're gonna go fishing." So we go out, and we're gonna spend a couple days out in his camp in the middle of the jungle fishing. And during this time, it was the rainy season, so the whole jungle had flooded, and it floods 2 or 3 feet for hundreds of kilometers, just in every direction. And you just find one or two little islands where you can kind of set up your hammocks and stay dry. And we go off of those in the canoes. And when that happens, everything that's crawling along the ground starts going up the trees. So as you're canoeing along, there are quite literally millions of bugs just covering the trees of every single kind. And there's snakes all over the place. And you're asking questions, and you'll be like, "What about that thing? Is that thing dangerous?" And they're like, "Yeah, that one will kill you. What about that one? Oh, that one you'll be hospitalized." And what they'll do is, to get worms for bait, the worms will go up the trees and curl themselves in these flowers. And so you got to reach up, grab the flower, uncurl it, and these worms are fast. They're like super fast. You got to grab the worm, throw it in a bucket. But while you're doing that, there's all these other bugs that are, you're like, I don't want to touch any of that. So Colson just sat in the canoe with his machete and just would whack everything that got close to him. But I had the honor of going and helping out with the fishing. So it was fun. But while we're there, at one point I look down, and there's this snake going across my foot. So I kind of tap our indigenous friend, and I'm like, "Hey, there's a snake on my foot." He's like, "Oh, it's fine." So he grabs his machete, gets it under the snake, and flips it off the boat. And afterwards, I'm talking to him. I'm like, "So that snake, what would it have done if it bit me?" And he kind of pauses, and he goes, "Jesus in the garden." Like, "Jesus in the garden? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Oh, that's the night before Jesus died." I'm like, "Oh, thank you for that."
It's a great picture. Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, like out of all the things, like the creatures, that's probably what I'd be most stressed about. Like, God will keep you safe, but there's just so many things out there that, yeah, I personally would be horrified of that. So I applaud you for that. Um, I was wondering, what do you recall a moment where you felt like you felt or saw God moving most evidently? I'm sure there was a lot of moments, but if there was one or two that just stuck out to you.
It's hard to put to words just how many times we saw God just opening doors and providing opportunities for us. One moment that really sticks out to me is we had a community that we'd been really trying to get out to. It was a community like at the very start of the river, just as far upriver as you could go, and we had planned several times to go out to them, and we never could for security reasons. The armed groups kind of move up and down the rivers recruiting, and so it's not always safe for us to go and travel up or down the rivers. And we'd been really praying that God would just open up a door for us, and we'd gotten back from a quite long trip, and we're kind of recovering, and we're debating whether we should fly back to Bogota and take a couple weeks. And one of our national partners comes up to us and goes, "Guys, we just got the news. It's safe for you to go. If you want to go, we can make it happen." And so, like the next day, we're prepping to go out. We put together a team. Our national partners, they were amazing. They got us a bunch of food and got us some people to help guide us, and we headed off. And we knew we only had about a week window that we would be able to go into this area, and it was 3 days on boat up, and then we knew it was 3 days back, so we knew we only had one day in the community. And so we arrive in the community. They were expecting us. It was super sweet, and we're talking with them, and they're like, "Hey, it turns out it's festivo today. It's the national holiday, so we're not doing anything today, and we have the whole day for you guys. So whatever you want to do or whatever you want to say, we're game." And so we go, and for the whole day, we got to walk them through creation to Christ, just the gospel. 6 hours. It was the most Spanish I've ever had to speak in one setting. Just 6 hours where the whole community is listening, and we got to do more in one day than what we usually do over the course of several weeks. Just in terms of sharing the gospel and doing discipleship and just being able to talk and engage with the community. So that was a time where we were like, that was God opening up doors for us.
And so, how
Yeah.
receptive do you find all these indigenous groups? I'm sure that they differ, but would you be able to kind of dive into that?
The communities themselves are extremely receptive. They really like missionaries. It largely stems from the possibility of receiving goods or things that they can't get. Um, but it does mean that they're very open to us, and they will listen, which is great. So we don't always like that they want us for our stuff for our money, but an open door is an open door. And there's a lot of groups that they really don't like and they won't let in. Anthropological groups, they really don't like. Mining groups and obviously the forestry groups, they really don't like. But missionaries, except for the Mormons, they don't like Mormons. Somehow they heard about Mormons. They didn't really take too kindly to them. But pretty much um, every other kind of missionary group, they're pretty open to.
I think you mentioned that before, and I wanted to ask that about that. Just the difference between how receptive they are to you and how they don't like other groups. You said anthropologists,
Anthropologists, yeah.
and then Mormons. What is it specifically about the anthropologists that makes them just negative towards them?
Well, the anthropologists, they out of good motivations, they want to remain separate and distinct from the communities. So they want to kind of not introduce anything that the communities don't already have. And as a result, they sometimes, how I was told by the indigenous groups, they kind of treat them like animals in a sense, where they're just going in and they're just watching them and they're just observing them. And nobody likes to be just observed and watched. And so when we go in, we're entirely involved in the community. We're helping out with building projects. If they're out in the fields harvesting yucca, we're out in the fields harvesting yucca. If they're fishing, we're fishing. If they're washing clothes in the river, we're washing clothes in the river. And, anybody, if you're invited into their house, they want you to be a part of how they're living and what that looks like. And so that's what we would go and do. We also we differ greatly from like the Catholics and the Mormons in that there's this kind of idea that if we can introduce Christian culture, that will lead them to Christ. But we're doing it very differently in that we first introduce them to Jesus, and we want them to come and know Jesus and have a relationship with Him. And as a result, there might be some aspects of culture that need to change and shift. But for the most part, we found that the gospel doesn't hurt culture. It helps culture grow and flourish. So, yeah, the Mormons in this similar way will try and introduce Christian culture and say, if you live like this and you do these things, you'll be saved. But we don't do that. We're saying, no, the only thing that can save you is Jesus. And then as you come to learn about Jesus more, there'll be things in your own personal life that you'll see that might need to change.
Do you know what specifically they were trying to do in regards to changing their culture? What are they targeting about these groups?
So the colonial empires were definitely the big ones. So it was a complete destruction of culture. So language, way of living, dress, dance, all of it. The Catholics would try to eradicate for the most part. Um, Other aspects, one of the questions we get, and this is a scenario that we were presented with in our training, was, all right, you have an indigenous man. He's come to know Jesus. He's repented. Um, and he's been reading his Bible, and he's realized that it talks about only having one wife. So when you're married, it's between you and just one woman. Well, indigenous communities, it's very common for a man to have multiple wives. And he's feeling this conviction where he's reading his Bible now, and he's like, well, I have these multiple wives. What am I supposed to do? Do I divorce them? Do I leave them? And what we say is, usually in that scenario is, that's right. You, in your past, in your sinful life, had these multiple wives, and that wasn't a good thing. But you're still responsible for them. Um, you've made a commitment to take care of them, and so you're going to have to take care of them. But you're only going to be, you're going to have to choose who is going to be your wife. These other women, you're still going to have to be responsible for their kids and for their lives and for um, everything else, because the man in these cultures usually is the provider. So if you divorce your wife, those women are um, likely going to face all kinds of challenges and problems. So things like that, where when you change culture, it has all kinds of effects that you don't really know about. And so we're not going in to try and change culture. We're trying to tell people about Jesus.
That makes sense. I was wondering if you had any specific highlights for just your own, not necessarily have to do with the mission trip or the gospel, but just, you're going out to this jungle, you're going to South America. I'm sure there's a lot of places you're able to check out. Anything that stood out as just a memorable moment for just as an experience?
I love the jungle. The jungle is great, but one of my favorite moments, we got to go on a trip in which we weren't in the jungle. We were in the high Andes in Peru, 3,500 meters plus. So really high elevation with Quechua groups. So these are former Incan Empire groups uh, that have largely remained isolated just because of their geography and where they're at. They love potatoes. But one moment that I just stands out to me is we were um, with these Quechuans at the top of a mountain, standing among um, ruins that actually predate the Incan Empire, and we're up there with this school group, and we just asked them, "Hey, would it be okay if we share some Bible stories?" And they're kind of telling us about the area and what it means for them and the significance. And they're like, yeah, and we still worship the sun and moon gods here. And we're like, oh, that's cool. Can we share some Bible stories? Um, and they let us. And so there's this really cool photo of me sharing the gospel with these kids. And it was a moment that just felt kind of surreal for me, just looking around and being able to see just the beauty of God's creation. And then at the same moment, tell these students that that the sun and the moon are beautiful, but there is a creator who is even more beautiful.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that picture on the newsletter when your dad showed us to the young adults group. You weren't there to go preach or do missionary work necessarily. Were you just on vacation, I think, or were you doing work at that point?
It was so that trip. It was a trip that we started off in, but then at the end of it, my aunt, um, who works in Peru, came to pick us up, and so we had taken a couple days where we were on vacation and just kind of exploring some of the cultural sites around instead of going into the communities, and that was one of them where we were.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even on vacation, God still has things planned for you, which is awesome.
yeah.
Um, Obviously, spending 2 years and you don't get to see your family a lot, um, and also just the danger. Like you said, there's a lot of groups over there who aren't necessarily happy that you're there. Is there any specific, I don't know, scary moments or just low points that you can remember that? Yeah,
It's really interesting. We were in so Colombia as a whole is considered a fairly dangerous country, but the big cities for the most part are very safe, especially the tourist spots. You're not going to have a problem. But the areas that we were going to, most of them were we call them the hot zones or the red zones. So if you look on like the U.S.'s travel advisory stuff, it's the same level as like Afghanistan, the places that we were going into. And so there is a lot of violence. There's a lot of opportunities for bad things to happen, but we never had anything extremely bad happen to us. We got into conversations with the cartel and with guerrilla groups. Whether we knew they were or not is always a little bit tricky. They never outright say we're the cartel. They'll send somebody and they'll start asking questions as to why we're there. But one moment that I remember is we were in this area. We knew it was a hot area. Um, and we knew we had to get from point A to point B, and point B was on the other side of their province. And we didn't really have a good national partner at this point. It was an area that missionaries hadn't been able to get into for the last 40 years. The local churches, whether they were Catholic or whatever kind of denomination, weren't allowing outside missionaries to come in. They'd had real problems 40 years ago with pastors and missionaries disappearing. And so we were some of the first ones to go into this area in the last 40 years. And we were taking this bus, it was a car, um, across the province. This person was like, "Oh, if you want to get over there, this is how you do it." And we get to point B, and we're talking with the person that was supposed to meet us there. He's like, "So how did you guys get here?" And we're like, "Oh, we took this little bus." He's like, "Oh, don't do that. Last week, that same bus got held up and 4 people got kidnapped." And we're like, "Huh, that would have been nice to know before we
yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
took that bus." But things like that, where there was lots of opportunities for bad things to happen, but by the grace of God, we never experienced anything really bad.
Amen. I remember you telling me a story about somebody who was following you at one point into the jungle that you weren't expecting to be there. I was wondering if you could tell that story.
Yeah. So this is one trip we were on. This was in the middle of the jungle, um, also in a quite rough area, and we were kind of a similar thing. Our local contact said we had to go out and go fishing, and we were going to spend a couple days out in the jungle fishing to get food for the next couple weeks. And we're going out, and we had to take a car to get to the river. And we get in the car, and this other guy hops in the car too. We didn't know him, but that wasn't like unusual for people just to hitch rides and stuff. So we didn't really think too much about it. And then we get to the canoe, and we're loading up, and this random guy also starts hopping in and joining us. And so we're like, "Oh, maybe just another local coming to come fish with us and whatever." And so we get out to the camp, and the other guys that we're with, they're like, "All right, you guys stay here and set up your hammocks and get the fire going. We're going to go out and get some fish. And when we come back, we can cook it up." And so they leave, and they leave us with this stranger. And we start talking to him. Turns out his name is Juan. And Juan very quickly starts diving into some red flag topics that we don't usually talk about in the jungle. So he starts going into what we think about U.S. politics, and what we think about the cartels, and what we think about all kinds of stuff. And at one point, um, he's talking about his brother who is in charge of one of these armed groups and how he's murdered people. And my partner Colson asks him, so he's like, "So what do you think about murder? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?" And the guy kind of pauses, and for too long, like a long pause, like more time than he needs, finally goes, "Well, I guess it's a bad thing." And we're like, okay. So we're getting all these red flags. He's discussing stuff. We're like, "So what's the main import in this area?" And he's like, "Oh, it's coca, which is the main ingredient for cocaine." And we're like, "Okay, cool. And what do you do with the coca?" "Well, it gets shipped to Brazil." "Oh, and what happens to it in Brazil?" "Well, it gets turned into this white powder." We're like, okay, all kinds of stuff that he's talking about. And our friends come back, and we kind of like, we're asking them like, "Oh, who's this guy?" And they don't really respond or tell us. Um, so we never got a definitive answer from them as to who he was. But our assumption is that he was part of one of the local either cartels or armed groups, and was sent to kind of scout us out and see what we were doing, see if we were worth their time. And yeah, we knew that he was armed. So like when we were fishing with him, he leaned over at one point and he had a pistol, which in the jungle you never find pistols. It's always homemade shotguns that they have. And yeah, so again, nothing bad ever happened, but we knew there were people who potentially could have caused bad things.
The boldness from Colson asking him how he feels about murder, that's um, yeah, that's crazy. Um, yeah, you being there for 2 years, I'm wondering what your experience was with your own individual faith, because
Mhm.
again, you being not used to the food and maybe going hungry and all these low points and high points. I'm just wondering how your faith fluctuated and how you personally grew in your faith across these 2 years.
Yeah. So when we're going through our missionary training, they talk about how most people can have faced two severe types of challenges at a time. But when you start to get into the three or the four, once you start having multiple different things that you're struggling with, then you really need to be careful. So they talk about, okay, security, health, spiritual warfare, and then your mental well-being. If you have two of those things that you're struggling with, you can probably you'll be okay. But once you have more than that, it becomes a real challenge. And for me and Colson, it was all of them at the same time. But the one that is hardest to see is the spiritual warfare. Um, me and Colson, very early on, we set up a rule that on any trip, so we would go out for a trip. They'd sometimes be a month or longer, and then we'd get a week, maybe 2 weeks to recover and plan for our next one, and then we'd head out again. And at some point during our week of recovery, we had this rule that we had to go and do a day of fasting, me and him. And that was a time for us to be praying for our upcoming trip, to be thankful for the trips that we'd just gone on, and to check in with each other to make sure that we were both doing okay. And we had this rule that if we didn't do that day, we weren't going to go out on our next trip until we did. And for us, that was probably one of the best things that we did, was to make sure that we were both right with God and each other. Because yeah, Colson was the person that I had, was the only person around to turn to if we did have challenges. So whether that was sick, and it worked out well that when he got sick, I wasn't, and when I was sick, he wasn't. But yeah, for me, yeah, spiritual warfare hits hard, and it hits in ways that you don't really think about. Um, so when we'd walk into communities, you could feel the darkness, and you could feel um, just the lack of Christ that existed in these places. And so you had to be on your guard. You had to be constantly praying. And for us, it was knowing that our churches, there was people back home who were praying for us. And we felt the effects of that for sure. Not always easy to describe or very clearly articulated, but yeah, we knew that the Lord was guarding us and providing opportunity to us for to be salt and light in these places. And yeah, it was it was a long 2 years for sure. There were definitely points where we'd get back from a trip and we were like, we are so tired and so hungry, and we don't know if we can go out on the next one. But then the Lord would rejuvenate us. Me and Colson never lost weight while we were out. We never got malaria, dengue, or yellow fever. I've got great photos of me where my entire body is covered in mosquito bites and all kinds of bites from different animal or different bugs. And yeah, we'd go into these communities and like half the kids would have malaria. And you're like, we never got it. So the Lord was definitely guarding us and keeping us safe.
Amen. Yeah, you guys have done so much work for that. Um, was there, and so compared to where you first landed in Colombia to when you came back to Calgary, would you say there was a drastic difference in your faith or just more solidified, or where would you see your faith as?
I think it's amazing what happens when you're entirely dependent upon God. Uh, the difference between like my first trip and my last trip is quite amazing. And I think the best way to explain that is my backpack. On our first trip, we had about 70 pounds of weight that we were carrying, food and supplies for 5 or 6 weeks. I had everything from tent pegs to like solar panels and all the gear that you could possibly need to survive out in the jungle. And all of it, most people would consider necessary. There's not a single bit of it that most like travel adventure kind of people would be like, you shouldn't bring that. All of it was important. But as we went throughout our trips, every trip we were getting rid of just a couple more items, things that we weren't using, things that we weren't needing. And by the end of it, our packs were down to about 10 pounds. So 10 pounds of weight that we're taking in for a month. And it was mostly our hammock, our Bibles, a couple snacks, maybe a first aid kit. And we always had 3 pairs of clothes, one that was wet, one that was clean, and one that was drying. And that's all we brought in. And yeah, I think it really shows just how much we started relying upon Christ and how much he was able to bless us in that, where people would give us food. And we didn't need to worry about having our phones or contacting, our family or anything like that. We knew that there would be opportunities in time for that, but our purpose was to be following Jesus and sharing the gospel.
And so, what out of the initial weight of your backpack, what was it that you found that was not needed? What were you getting rid of at that point to make your backpack down to 10 pounds?
Clothes, food, tarps, water. I had like these big heavy tent pegs that I didn't bring. Comfort items that weren't super useful.
What comfort items did you bring specifically?
Things like I had multiple flashlights,
Mm.
so you just getting used to living life next to a campfire. Um, or like headphones. I usually would bring in 2 pairs of headphones. I just got down to one. Um, just little things like that where over time you're like, I didn't use it. I don't need it. It's either going to get given to somebody else or left behind.
You were preaching yesterday at our church, and there was one thing that you said that I kind of wanted to expand on. You said that we control the inputs and God controls the outputs. And I was wondering if you could just expand on that.
Yeah. So God doesn't want equipped people. He can use people who have all the tools and skills for sure. But what he really desires is willing people. I heard a voice cry out from the desert saying, "Who shall I send?" And I replied, "Here I am, Lord, send me." When we talk about people that we're looking for, potential candidates for new jungle missionaries, we're not looking for the Navy SEAL. We're not looking for the Boy Scout. We're not looking for the person who says, I can do this, that I am qualified to go and do this. What we're really looking for is the person who's willing to go and willing to put it all in God's hands. And in a similar way, we just have to be willing to say, here I am, use me. in whatever capacity, shape, or form that looks like. And if you're able to do that, God will do amazing things through you. So we're just saying yes. That's all we're doing.
Did you have any hesitance for yourself before you decided to go on this 2-year mission trip? Like, did you feel fully qualified to go?
Oh, not at all. There was a lot of things where I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing at all. My language skills didn't have any of that. Uh, Preaching and teaching, I actually really dislike public speaking. And one of the things that I was like, oh, this will be great. If I'm in the jungle, I won't have to do a whole lot of public speaking. Turns out when you show up in a community who's never had an outsider come and visit them, they've got questions and they want to know. And on Jungle Time, they've got all the time in the world to hear about it. So I did a lot of public speaking and in Spanish and had to get used to that. But yeah, I never felt fully prepared for any of the trips we were going on. Yeah, there was not a single time where I was like, I feel confident in what I'm doing.
Your in regards to public speaking, your gift for storytelling, and all the times that I've heard you preach or just do devotionals with our young adults or at church, yeah, you just paint such a clear picture of everything that you've been gone through. That yeah, I just excited to see what God uses that for in the future, and yeah, and so I've got a couple questions in regards to for the person out there who is potentially interested in going into missionary
Mm-hmm.
and into that field, but is hesitant in that same place, doesn't feel qualified. What advice would you give them?
I would say if you're thinking about the IMB or whatever organization you're going to go with, just start the application process and just see what opportunities exist and what kind of places you can serve, because there might be there are definitely things that you haven't thought about that you can use, like your skills, your education, whatever it is that you haven't considered, but God is considering. And just don't put yourself in a box. Um, I think there's lots of people who have an idea of what they want for the future and don't even think that they might be able to use the skills that God has given them for ministry. So like Colson, he's a psychologist. He likes tea and books and comfy chairs, and God used him to do great things out in the jungle. Um, so yeah, don't limit yourself. Allow God to work through you, and look for those opportunities that are available, because they're going to be there. I think right now with the IMB there is 2,500 open positions around the world. All of them are different kinds of jobs, and that's just one organization that exists.
What does the IMB stand for again?
International Mission Board. But everything from YWAMs to Cape and Rays, there's opportunities that are available, and yeah, don't limit yourself.
Now, for the person who is potentially has heard about Christ or feeling lost or considering going to church, what would your message be for them?
Mm. I would say go for it. Start looking into it, figuring out where you are spiritually, and find a church that can help you grow in that. Um, Christ is amazing, and his love is so powerful, and it's transformative. And when you take that first step of faith and say, here I am, Lord, I'm a sinner and I need you, amazing things happen. We talk about this changing power of Christ. And for some people, it's a miraculous change going from um, like just the worst of sinners, just the regular person. And for me, um, it's just been a process of recognizing the sins that are in my life and growing and developing my faith. So for some people, it's a very clear black and white. I was once this, and now I'm this. And other people, it's more of a slow process. Uh, so start asking those questions, finding people who can give you answers, um, and who are doing it out of a position of love. Um, Not people who are trying to win arguments or convince you that their way is right, but who are trying to show you who Jesus is.
Caleb, thank you so much for being here. Before we end, I was just wondering if there's anything I can personally pray for you or anything our viewers can pray for you as you've come back to Calgary and trying to get used to your old life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm still on jungle time. I've grown to dislike setting dates a year in advance. I don't know why we do that, but yeah, so still getting used to not being able to wake up every day and just let the Lord guide me, and trying to get back into North American time. So prayer for that, and then I'm in seminary right now, so prayer that that time would be fruitful and useful and good preparation for what comes next.
Will do. Thank you. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining our podcast and for listening in. Um, Again, I hope that you guys were able to just learn something from Caleb's story. If there's some of you guys who are interested in missionary work, definitely check out the International Mission Board and look at the opportunities that are there. And hopefully that might have sparked you guys to be interested in going to church and maybe one step closer to committing yourself to Christ. Until the next episode, stay bold and stay blessed. Thank you, guys.